Play button.
Welcome to episode 12 of SCI Fridays. Are you feeling defensive? See, that was me doing a smolder, and I thought that was quite professional. We have been told that we should be more serious on the show, which is why I was smoldering professionally.
Nick, we spoke about this, right? And you cannot introduce the people's smolder to people. You see
I
what
just did the people's eyebrow right there.
You did the people's something, right? Speaking of something, there is no guest today. We believe that we are good enough to entertain you for 20 minutes without having a third party, like a third wheel or a tripod. I think Chris mentioned a tripod. But yes, what are we talking about today, Nick?
We are talking about Defender for the world. It's all things to all men. But what does Defender, or should we say the Defenders, really do? It sounds like, like Avengers, but Defenders. They're not assembled, though. They are... Is it a clump of Defenders?
What is the show about? What is this?
Well, you are going to have to stay tuned to find out more.
Is this where we roll the jingle? Welcome to SCI Fridays, your portal into security, compliance, identity management, and you. Welcome everyone. If you are new to the channel, we talk about things that get us defensive. Defensive about all things security and compliance. Or do we get defensive? I'm not sure. So pull up a chair, grab some water, or if you like our previous guest who day drinks. Are we allowed to say that? We can't say that Warren day drinks. Do we even know if he day drinks? No, he doesn't day drink.
Libel,
but we do have...
It's defamation. We can't say that.
We can't say that. Okay.
Can't say
but
that.
If it's not edited out, it's there, right? Warren doesn't day drink, for the record. I used to day drink. There we go. I'm just throwing myself under the bus as well. So
you're not helping.
Hey, what's that?
You're not helping. You're ruining the profession of the show. It's a big word on a Friday.
So stick around, grab a whiskey, grab a coffee. I don't know what you're doing at 2 p.m. today. You might be having a drink because the last plane has flown over the mountain. But we're very excited to have you here. Now, do we still do segments, Nick, or do we go straight into... Because I don't know what to do without guests, right? Because we normally have segments, right? And the first segment is a Satya quote, because the show is mostly about Microsoft technology, right?
Mm-hmm.
So Satya says in his book, it's the refresh one, the view you adopt for yourself profoundly affects the way you lead your life. So if you are defensive... Anyhow, that was our Satya quote of the week. Moving on to our next segment of the week, there are a few things that excites us, and we always like to make sure that you're not only entertained by the show, but we are also informed, and we keep it as informative as possible. Now, because we had Warren on last week, and he's like just showing up again this week, not physically, but metaphorically, because he had to use the word Kubernetes in last week's show, right? He has to name drop Kubernetes every time he is doing something with me. We decided to go find out if there is some security noise about Kubernetes. And lo and behold, there is an AKS security deep dive, five-part series about implementing a security baseline for AKS on the Azure architecture blog over at Tech Community. So head over to Tech Community. If you are into Kubernetes and wanting to know how to implement a CIS benchmark, because it's based on the CIS benchmark for AKS, there's a 5-part series on best practices for implementing security baseline using the CIS benchmark for AKS.
That was amazing. I loved that. Very good.
if I cared about containers, I would too. And I suppose one day, eventually I will, because then we have to talk about Kubernetes. And it's like that orphan stepchild, right? That you no longer want. That's what I feel about Kubernetes.
That's not inclusive. I feel like I'm the political correctness police, but no, that's not. Speaking of politically incorrect, how do you defend yourself from a gang of clowns that come at you?
Is that a dad joke?
You go for the juggler. I feel like that's a wonderful segue to the next bit.
I'm very defensive right now. I'm defending myself against dad jokes, right? And clown jokes, because I don't know if there's the same thing. Coming back to what we were talking about, I don't drive a Land Rover Defender. And when I talk about Defender, the first thing I implot is a Land Rover, the one that I want when I grow up. I want a new Land Rover Defender. Seb Matthews has got one, very upsetting. They're the price of 3 really well-grown kidneys. That's how expensive they are, right? So if I had 3 kidneys, I'd sell them and get a Land Rover, but then I'd die. And we are not talking about Land Rover Defenders. We are actually talking about Microsoft Defender being all things to all men. Now, did we mention, I'm sure it was a hot news of the week in one of the episodes. And I just need to click that button, right? That one. Yes.
Oh, that's very pretty.
So I think we spoke about the cybersecurity reference architecture that Microsoft has created for their security offerings. And I'm actually going to do that because our faces are in the way. So this is an excessively busy slide because there's a slide deck that's got like 60 slides that talk to all things security, compliance, and identity, like the show's called, SCI Fridays, and you and Microsoft and what you can actually achieve. And today we wanted to, because last week when we had the Warren on the show, he talked about how to build a security operations center using Microsoft Tech and how Microsoft goes about giving you the best of everything because they crowdsource security. And they give you the MITRE attack framework stuff built into all things security. And this week, we decided to focus a bit on what Microsoft Defender is, because it's all things to all men. Now, you'll notice top left or top right, I don't know if the screen's inverted, but there's mention of Microsoft Defender, EDR. On the right-hand side, there's more Microsoft Defender SaaS. On the bottom, there's Defender for Cloud, but it's referenced a little bit differently. And in the middle, there's more Defender for Cloud. And on the middle left, there's Defender for Endpoint. Now, I'm sorry, Nick, but this is hugely confusing for mere mortals, right? And I wouldn't know where to start because we like to make sure that our listeners, viewers, or not readers, because that's not transcribed, should get a view into where Microsoft is going with security, compliance, and identity. And we believe that, like Microsoft believes, Defender is all things to all men. So today's show is really about taking you through what Defender products are out there, how Microsoft logically groups them into sections, and what each of these products do. And now I'm going to hand over to my learned friend, Mr. Blank over there, to start the beginning of your Defender journey and where it's all at. I'm stepping away from the mic now, Mike.
Do I get to do the first Defender? The first Defender that I like to talk about, and Defender for me still rhymes like Avenger. So in my head, I have this picture of a politically correct superhero with a acceptable color scheme and a cape flapping behind him, her, or it. And we're talking about Microsoft Defender for Cloud. So if we think about Microsoft Defender for Cloud, we think Azure, but actually it's not just Azure. It is multi-cloud. And what we can do with Microsoft Defender for Cloud is that we can defend what we place into Azure, as well as we can take the native signals that come out of AWS and other clouds, and we can create that instrumentation. Obviously, once we have that instrumentation, we can also create response. Now, just for the interest of time, there's a bunch of things that we can deploy in Azure that we have deep verticals for, and that includes servers, storage, SQL, containers, app service, Key Vault, resource manager, DNS, open source relational databases, and Cosmos DB, which is currently in preview. Now, think about all the things you could deploy into Azure, Alistair. We have a Defender for all of that, as well as Azure itself and your multi-cloud workloads.
Well, remember, Microsoft Defender for Cloud, and they've rebranded quite a few things in coming up with all words or sentences start with Microsoft Defender. Microsoft Defender for Cloud was Azure Security Center and another product. I can't remember if it was threat management or something. And they've merged those two. They're doing a lot of this on the M365 side as well, where I think Defender for Endpoint or Defender for M365. They've changed some names and it's rolling into security.microsoft.com. So they're pushing new things into it to give you an integrated view into the world. So yes, Defender for Cloud is the old security center. And you've got quite a few things with that. You've got the Secure Score, which is really the foundation for looking at cloud security posture management. Because everyone talks about, hey, you know, if you go to a security bar and you pull up a chair next to a guy and the first thing he's going to say to you, so what is your secure score? You know, and then it becomes a competition about who's got the highest security score, right? And secure score, not security score, right? And this is where Microsoft started. We give you a real-time view on the health or the posture of your organization in the cloud. And we bench it against some compliance frameworks like NIST and CIS and a few other things. And we tell you what the rest of the world is doing. And then you have quite a few remediation actions that you should be applying to get that secure score up. And that really then extends to the various workloads, like Nick mentioned earlier on what it actually does. It's talking to containers. It will talk to your SQL. It will talk to your virtual machine. It looks at your network security groups and it says, hey, these things are not really good for you in your posture today. So fix that. It's like Nick talking to me about, before you run, you need to stretch and expand muscles and crouch and do all those things so that your run is better. And think about Defender for Cloud as the tooling you need to make sure that you run better in the cloud.
It's wonderful.
Was that okay?
It's stunning. I'd like to, with your permission, move on to the next one.
I permission granted.
And thank you, Captain. So the next one is a personal favorite of mine. It's been rebranded a few times. It's currently known as Microsoft Defender for Cloud Apps. So if you think about the wide world that is out there, which is our cloud surface, including M365 and every other cloud that is out there, Microsoft Defender for Cloud Apps is what we used to call a CASB, although it's not only a CASB. The cool thing about Defender for Cloud Apps is it doesn't only do CASB stuff, it also does correlation, which can be a little bit confusing when we look at some of the options we'll talk about later when we talk about things like SIEM and SOAR and where these things go. Something to take into account is that every time we talk about a Microsoft Defender for something, we are actually talking about a source of data that can go to somewhere else and be analyzed and then do things against. So if it's a SOAR as an example. And one of the examples I was looking at this week is what do we do around ransomware as an example. So if I have a ransomware outbreak in a user's OneDrive, how would I know? And with Defender for Cloud Apps, I would know that in OneDrive, SharePoint, Dropbox, and anything else that I have linked, any one of the 70 plus clouds that, and I think close to 1,600 applications that it supports out of the box, I have this list of signals where for a particular user, 3,000 files or 300 or 30 files are being changed within a defined security period. And I want you to do something, which could be send an alert, which doesn't sound very useful, or disable the user. So CASB is fairly rich, and Defender for Cloud Apps is very instrumentable. Is that even a word, Alistair?
Well, I've got a bone to pick, right? Because I just got my customers to call Microsoft Defender for Cloud Apps before they gave it that name, MCAS, because it just rolls off the tongue. Thanks, John. John is my resident water bearer. And
we're not allowed to call him water boy?
Water bearer, water boy. as I was saying earlier on, MCAS rolled off the tongue like CASB does. And because Microsoft decided to change it, I'm very disgruntled because my customers started calling it MCAS, and now we have to call it MDK. Doesn't roll.
No.
Great unknown product. And there used to be two versions. I think there's still two versions. There's the standard one that comes with Defender for Cloud Apps, the O365 version, and then the M365 version. I think it's important. There's quite a few differences between the two.
There's
Not
actually
only
a
is it
standalone edition as well. So there's 3 of these, believe it or not.
Oh, wow. But not only does it do the traditional CASB stuff, route traffic, sniff a packet like the Netscopes of the world, because Netscope's a really good product, but it also does additional things, right? Like it will monitor GitHub repositories. You can attach GitHub to it and it will sniff for anomalies and then come back to you and say, hey, there's a problem, or hey, I've denied this user's elevated privilege on this managed identity because we found that that managed identity or that user that has access to that managed identity has injected malicious code into the GitHub repo for the website. So not only,
Sorry, you go on.
Not only are you able to monitor third-party applications through CASB and the interaction thereof of users attaching themselves to a third-party app like GitHub, right? You also get to do things on the fly based on the principle of zero trust, because that is vitally important. So signal, decision, enforce. Simple thing for CASB. Hey, you're sitting at a coffee shop. You're no longer on a secured network. I'm going to apply a rights management policy or a information protection policy to a document on the fly so that when you download it, it's not at risk of being utilized on that internet cafe's PC or that unsecured desktop that you're coming from. So it's a lot more than, and in the name, it's not just CASB. It's Defender for cloud apps, including Office 365 being a cloud app.
Speaking of desktops, Microsoft Defender for Endpoint. Now, there is a version of Defender that comes bundled with every version of Windows, which is actually built in, and there's actually no real reason to buy any more antivirus, in my opinion. But anyway, it's not just the only version of Defender for endpoints. Since there's a, shall I call it, the normal flavor and the supercharged flavor, which we know as EDR. But Alistair, why do we still care about EDR? Is it that we can find code that is behaving badly that we don't have signatures for?
Well, we care about the endpoint, right? In the old days, we cared about the perimeter because we could enforce security based on perimeter. Bricks and mortar,
That's right.
Firewall, and Ninja Dust, I can have security. With Rona times and working from home, or hybrid being an end state, not a journey, right? And we talked about that at the M365 user group this week with Dan Home. Endpoint security is pivotal to managing things because the endpoint is the device that gets hacked, not the server. Once you're in on an endpoint because of password spray or a bad USB stick for ransomware, like Matt was talking about the other day, the device is compromised. Now, when we start worrying about security for endpoint, not just enrollment, right? Because you can have a managed device that's enrolled, like in the old days with Intune and System Center, and it is compliant. But the USB port on it could still be exposed, or someone gets an email and all of a sudden you click on the link and it takes you to your ransomware site and Ninja Dust, BitLocker, everything else, the disk is gone, right? So being able to manage the endpoint from a defensive position, note how I threw that in, and no, I don't watch rugby, so I have no idea what a defensive position is. You can now extend this Defender footprint into managing. Oh, is that...
That's, to me, defensive position. It's like, it's also don't hit me. Also works.
That is from John Constantine from the movie Constantine, where he glues these two tattoos together. And if I didn't have this ink, I would have gotten the John Constantine's tattoo. That's awesome.
Yeah. Informative and educational.
At the same time, just rate my ratings on IMDb, please, around John Constantine, the movie. Hopefully there's a second Constantine coming up. There was a series, but now we're digressing. Talking about protection, Endpoint security is really where it's at, right? You have to have some measure of managing the endpoint. If you don't, chances are your attack surface is exponentially, that's a word, exponentially increased, right?
It's a good word. Also, something that we want to consider is that endpoints are one of the attack vectors which are low-hanging fruit and from which we move laterally. Now, if we don't have an endpoint that we could compromise easily, then we may want to shoot for an identity to compromise. And you may have guessed this, Microsoft Defender for identity. And why do we care? Well, with the amount of signals that we have out there, how do I know that it's the real Alistair logging on to a web browser in Turkey? Not that there's any bad people in Turkey per se, but Alistair should not be logging on to browsers in Turkey.
You should have just said Springfield, Nick, because there's so many Springfields across the world. It wouldn't matter. You'd have. They wouldn't come inside, Matt. Where is he? Come this way around. And we actually have a guest on the show today. And if we just go back,
all things happening on a Friday afternoon, I think we should increase there we go.
Much better.
Hello and welcome to SCI Fridays.
So Matt, thank you for joining us today. I'm glad you made some time in your busy schedule. We've been talking about Microsoft Defender for everything, right? And you've got some opinions on ransomware and virtualization. So we are currently at Defender for Identity. That's where we are. We've gone through quite a few things around Defender. Any views or opinions on Defender for Identity and where you see the world?
Defender for Identity is cool because it integrates with your Active Directory and will identify any identity risks or vulnerabilities or threats that are happening against your users. So
is it weird, or are we just old and my office is warm? But we're all wearing glasses, right? Is that like a measure for how old we are, right? Or
no, because I've been wearing glasses since I was like 11.
This is old man's glasses that I have on. Nick, okay, so I'm the old one, right? Anyhow, coming back to what we were talking about Defender for everything. What is your favorite Defender product?
At the moment, Defender for Endpoint, I would say, because of the XDR capabilities that built in there.
Bing, 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 buzzword bingo. Can you explain to us what that part, because we've actually got a buzzword bingo part of the show, and he just magically pulled it out. Yeah. So in today's version of buzzword bingo, he actually hit the buzzword. We should have that, right? If we've got a buzzword in the show and someone mentions it, we need a bell that goes ding, 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 ding. Buzzword.
I'll work on that right now.
Is there a bell? There should be sounds, right, for StreamYard. Anyhow,
there's background music.
XDR.
Yeah. Thanks for giving me time to think about it. Extended detection and response.
So it's not about endpoint detection.
Yeah, it's not just endpoint, because what it does is it correlates signals from elsewhere, the other Defender products. So you've got Defender for Office, Defender for Identity.
It's music in the background.
Yeah, it's not quite a bing, 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 bing.
No, anyway. It's not a bing, 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 bing.
So it's correlating that information from those other signals, and you're getting detection and response not just on the endpoint. So
is that your SIEM that you were talking about? Because you've got signals going in somewhere?
No, you then can have that information going into a SIEM, but Defender for Endpoint has its own portal, if you will. It's the main portal where all the security Defender stuff is going into, and all the alerts and incidents. It correlates alerts, multiple alerts, into what it correlates into an incident. If it thinks it's all related, it creates an incident.
And extended is not limited to just endpoints then?
Correct.
Okay, all right. So EDR is an evolution of XDR is an evolution of EDR to be more inclusive for things that are not endpoints.
Yeah, but like your identity, which could be used on the endpoint, but it's not a file that's being run that's a malware. It's also, you could be using PowerShell on the endpoint, which is not malicious in any way, but the code within PowerShell that's being run could be malicious. And then you could be moving laterally and getting access to privileged identities.
And that's completely different to shifting left or shifting right. That's moving laterally. Another top word from our resident Defender expert.
Lateral
So
movement.
you have shift left, shift right, and then moving laterally. We like that. Anyhow, we're digressing. So to round up all the defenders for all of the things, we've got one more to go, and that's called Defender for IoT and OT, right? And I think that is on this one here, right at the bottom. They've got IoT and operational technology. I don't know what operational technology is.
Pick me.
There, and we have a winner today. Matt, would you like to talk about Defender for IoT and OT?
So, so most people know IoT, and it's Internet of Things. It's anything that has an internet connectivity, a network connection. So your fridges, your smart TVs.
My new air conditioning.
Okay.
It's
All right,
Wi-Fi.
yes.
It's Wi-Fi.
Sure. Just as long as you don't have an aquarium that is internet connected. Because
Yeah, but that smashed the world, right, when it came to IoT hacks.
Yes. Okay. So that's IoT, but OT has actually been around for even longer because it's operational technology. So if you run a plant, let's say you're a car manufacturer, for example, all of those machinery that is connected to one another and have controllers and potentially connected to the internet is your operational technology. And if something, gets compromised on that plant, your entire business goes down because you can't manufacture cars.
So before the internet, there was operational technology, right? And they might be running different protocols because we think of IoT as only Wi-Fi, but you get things that are running on CBus, X10, a Zigbee Z-Wave, and it's also about protecting that, not just Wi-Fi.
Yes.
So Nick, and he's staring at his phone. Look at him. He stopped listening to us, Matt. This is why the three of us should never present at an actual event, right? Sharing a stage.
Look, as far as the crowd is concerned, I'm still smoldering at the camera.
So to wrap up today's show, we now have taken you through Defender for everything, right? And Microsoft's stance on that is they take a defensive stance on defending your... There's a guy called Tom Buck that I follow, and he always has these weird sort of segues into words. And I think I would like to be that wordsmith.
Okay.
Because I'd like to defend wordsmithing. Oh yeah, I'm getting better at this. Anyhow, thank you all for watching. We hope that you understand that Defender is all things to all men when it comes to security in the cloud. You can catch me. My name is Alistair Pugin, and it's somewhere over there. And Nick is?
I'm at... Whoa, this is so difficult today. It is Friday afternoon. Where am I? I'm somewhere over there. I'm there.
And Matt, how do we get a hold of you to ask you about Defender things?
Twitter, so at SKRODS. Scrods.
I've worked it out now.
Scrods.
I don't know which camera I'm looking at. Is it that one or that one?
Would you like to look at that one, Matt? We can actually bring this in.
No. It's fine. It's done now. It's too late now.
Well,
because I think I was out of focus on that.
Because it was focusing on me.
Mm-hmm.
So thank you once again for joining us on this week's episode of SCI Fridays. Defender Says What? And we'll catch you on the next show. Ciao, ciao.
Nice weekend.